So another place where socialization happens, especially in reference to gender and sexuality, is the school. Schools are generally the first agent of socialization that children experience outside of their immediate families. It may be the first time that children are introduced to thoughts and ideas that contradict those of their families. Schools are a very important agent of socialization, and the messages that students receive can certainly have a big impact on the way children think about themselves. Research shows that in schools, teachers tend to favor boys in several ways. Boys receive more attention and instructional time and are more likely to be called on in class, are posed with more challenging questions or tasks, and are given more praise for the quality of their work. Knowing this, it forces us to ask the question, what message does that send to boys, and what message does that send to girls? Peer groups are turning into an extremely important socializing group. In fact, many sociologists argue that peer groups are the most dominant agent of socialization from middle school all the way through adulthood. For example, as teens, boys tend to gain prestige through athletic ability and their sense of humor, and by taking risks and by defying norms. Girls, on the other hand, gain prestige through social position and physical attractiveness. When teens receive praise or punishment, they are learning which behaviors are acceptable for them based on their gender. And they're learning the parameters of what acceptable behavior is in accordance with the gender roles that they are performing. The media, of course, is another huge and becoming more and more important agent of socialization. There's no question that sex role behavior is portrayed in a highly stereotypical manner in all forms of the media. Television, movies, magazines, books, video games, everything masculine or is based on a hypermasculinity for men and a hyperfemininity for women. And this is highly controversial because we know that the media impacts us, but there is much debate about exactly how much we are being impacted by the media. We can note that in recent decades we have seen some interesting correlations. Female models have gotten thinner. Male actors have gotten more muscular. And both boys and girls are experiencing higher rates of depression, more cases of anorexia and bulimia, and greater issues with self-esteem and self-worth when they cannot meet up with these gender expectations. How does this affect your life chances? Females born in 2013 are expected to live an average age of 81.2 years, while males are expected to live 76.4 years. So sex and gender affect almost every significant aspect of our lives, even how long we live. Of course, women are disadvantaged in the institutional settings of our society. Compared to men, women are more likely to do a disproportionate amount of housework, earn less than their male peers at work, and live in poverty. So, in essence, women are more likely to work a second shift. The term second shift was coined by sociologist Arlie Hochschild, and it refers to the unpaid work, cooking, cleaning, laundry, childcare, home repair, yard work that must be done after the day's paid labor is complete. So women are being shouldered and have been shouldered with more work than men for a long time. That brings us to the feminization of poverty, which refers to the economic trend that women are more likely than men to live in poverty, due in part to the gender gap in wages, the higher proportion of single mothers compared to single fathers, and the increasing cost of childcare. So, men do less work, they shed the responsibilities of child rearing, and women are impoverished because of it. This is changing, but it is a fact of life. Men have done little compared to what women have done in reference to the work on this planet. Another thing we need to think about is the women's movement, i.e. feminism, which is the belief in the social, political, and economic equality of the sexes and the social movements organized around that belief. In the United States, the history of the women's movement can be divided into 3 historical waves. First wave is mid-19th century through 1920. This was the earliest period of feminist activism and included the period from the mid-19th century until American women won the right to vote in 1920. The campaign organized around gaining voting rights for women and was referred to as the suffrage movement. Then there's the second wave of feminism. This wave was a period of feminist activity during the 1960s and 1970s. It often associated with the issues of women's equal access to employment and education, and it also married up to many of the other social movements that were taking place at the time. And now we have the third wave of feminism, which is the 1980s to the present, and this is focused on diversity among women's experiences and identities. And then, of course, last but not least, the men's movement. Although originally broadly sympathetic with feminism, the men's movement has now split into the men's rights movement, a group that feels feminism creates disadvantages for men, and the pro-feminist men's movement, a group that feels that sexism harms both men and women and wants to fundamentally change society's ideas about gender. The male liberation movement originated in the 1970s, and it was wanting to discuss the challenges of masculinity, and it's not surprising that this movement takes shape shortly after much of what we see in reference to the passage of the Civil Rights Movement and many of the social movements of the 1960s, where men, especially white men, lost a lot of power, or were certainly on a slippery slope in reference to losing power, and the men's or the male liberation was a pushback to that.